So I just finished watching X-Men 97, and it's really good. Look, I know I'm not breaking new ground here or anything, but yeah, this show's a masterpiece.
To me, my X-Men. That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
This is easily the best show that Marvel's made on Disney+, maybe only beaten out by Daredevil, I guess. And it is the best thing that Marvel has done since Endgame. Most of this is because the show is an actual show and not one long, drawn-out movie. There is an episodic flow, and yeah, as we get later in the season, there is an overarching story with cliffhangers, but the show has earned the right to do that because it has endeared us to the characters and the setting. The characters being by far the best thing about this show. I already see people horny posting about Cyclops. Storm has her own little journey that, while I personally didn't care for that much, clearly other people loved. And Magneto is the best he's ever been. Seriously, I don't know how anyone can come away from this show and not say,
Magneto was right.
Rogue and Gambit are also massive standouts. In a series that seems to love to focus on Logan, Scott, and Jean, it's really good to get to see two other characters' relationship take center stage and be much more interesting. Without getting into spoilers, it's clear the writers understood that the best thing for romance is always tragedy. And speaking of romance, let's talk about the Summers. As I said before, Scott's already a fan favorite, and if I'm being honest, Cyclops has always been one of my favorite superheroes. This show almost feels like it was made to spite the Fox X-Men movies with how well they treat Cyclops. In those movies, Scott's a virgin who gets cucked by Wolverine in every scene. This version of Scott clearly went to alpha male boot camp. He's got all the women he can want, even maybe a little too much.
Yeah, crazy stupid fine.
And they use his powers in such a unique and creative way. Apparently the animators were heavily inspired by Marvel vs. Capcom for the fight scenes, and it clearly shows.
Chris, gay?
Now it's that time of the year again to get up my Marvel tank of copium and hope that, maybe we can get Marvel 4 someday. Smells like, Dr. Doom's foot dive.
Versus Street Fighter.
What's up?
Duke it out in Marvel vs. Capcom 2, New Age of War.
All the fight scenes are incredibly well animated, even giving a lot of Eastern anime a run for their money. They also do one of my favorite little monkey brain things in superhero stories, which is having the characters do team-up attacks. It's such a stupid thing to see, but I just love it whenever characters, use their powers together, because let's be honest, superhero media is a very ape-brain form of entertainment. So when Magneto throws a bunch of metal shards and then Storm electrocutes them, I get a neuron activation. Basically the same feeling I get when I knock down a Rathian and use a full charge elemental slash to cut his tail off. In case you can't tell, I've been playing a lot of Capcom games recently. Anyway, back to Marvel, baby. Storm, much like Cyclops, is given the all-star treatment, and even though I personally wasn't really connected to what they were doing with her story, I thought it was kind of boring. Clearly I'm in the minority there, and it's not like it was bad, it just kind of wasn't something that I liked. Most of this is probably due to the fact that I didn't care for Forge much, and he's like the secondary character in that storyline. That's probably also because that story starts during the worst episode of the season. Montendo's the only episodic episode that feels like filler, mostly because of how important the episode that came before it and how important the episode directly after it is. In my opinion, 3 and 5 are the best and most narratively important episodes, so wedging a really weird Jubilee and Storm episode in between it is just kind of boring. Oh, and speaking of episode 3, Jean Grey. Boring, lame, unfunny, unfaithful, weak. Jean Grey with thigh highs. Powerful, amazing, perfect, flawless, awesome. The Chad Madeline Pryor versus the virgin Jean Grey. And now that the lame couple's out of the way, let's talk about the actual main characters of this show. I've always had a passing interest in Gambit and Rogue, mostly because Gambit's cool and Rogue's hot. But I was never really into them because most of my X-Men knowledge comes from the Fox movies, which, they don't exactly do those characters justice.
This is stupid.
But these two characters are basically the main characters of this season. Rogue has her own tragic relationship with both Gambit and Magneto, and even though it's a little weird to have the whole Gambit NTR arc, I'm willing to overlook it because of the places that it allows the characters to go to, specifically in episode 5. The thing about Magneto and Rogue is that I'm okay with Rogue liking Magneto, but I just never felt comfortable with Magneto liking Rogue back. It's not even the age thing, it's just the fact that he holds such power over her. Not only for being his mentor and leader in a lot of cases, but also the way their powers interact. In case you don't know, basically Rogue's superpowers make it so that if she makes skin-to-skin contact with anybody, she'll sap the life out of them subconsciously. However, Magneto's magnetic fields counteract that because of Gene and X random superpower comic book bullshit. So it makes sense for Rogue to like Magneto since he's the only person who theoretically she could have physical intimacy with. But Magneto doesn't feel the same way, and so there's a very dangerous power dynamic when you're dealing with that. Again, I like the places that this is able to take Rogue to as a character, but it feels like it's kind of at the detriment of Magneto because he never has a moment where he reckons with the power that he holds over Rogue. Again, that's just a minor nitpick because in the scenes where Magneto isn't dealing with that kind of stuff, he's clearly the best character in the show. Now, I feel like I don't even need to talk about Magneto. I mean, did any of you watch the show? Okay, I don't have to explain why he's so good. Again, he's the real hero in this story. That's really the magic trick of this show, making you realize that Magneto and Professor X have basically swapped roles in this story. I'm just gonna come out and say it. I would have taken Magneto's deal at the end. Alright, now let's get to Remy. I always knew I'd love Gambit, and this show proves why. The show strikes a perfect balance between making him the super cool skater boy Gambit and the guy who carries a lot of pain inside quietly. Dude, that shot of him flicking cards into the fire is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. Not beautiful in a good way though. No, I didn't like that scene. It's beautiful in the way that like open heart surgery is beautiful. And it's even great to see how his character doesn't really grow but more so affects people around him. Specifically Rogue, if you know what I'm talking about. All he really has to do is sit there and be pretty, and you know what, that's enough. And I know a lot of people are very hit or miss on some of the side characters, but I liked almost all of them. Morph is a great comic relief who has an amazing relationship that is properly explored with Wolverine in incredibly subtle detail. And I know I said I love how they use Cyclops powers, but I think I liked Morph's a little bit more, not just because of the cameos, but also because of the places they were able to take him. I know a lot of people really don't like Sunspot, but I thought he was fine. I mean, I love Jubilee, who I guess I can also rope in here. Sure, they are the stars of, again, the worst episode of the show, but outside of that episode, I thought they were perfectly fine. His relationship with his mother is very interesting, and I found very depthful for how real it felt. And Jubilee's just gotta sit there and be pretty. Plus, that move that she does to the unnamed big bad at the very end is the coolest thing in the whole show. All of the villains are really great too, since they bring back this idea of the mutants being an allegory for civil rights issues. I'm not going to spoil anything about the big bad or whatnot, but just know it goes to some very dark and thought-provoking places. And I think that's the real kicker of X-Men 97. It finally brings the X-Men back to being a story about a group of weirdos fighting for a world that hates them. I probably shouldn't use a word like weirdo when I'm complimenting them. Regardless, this show brings X-Men back in a big way by understanding that it's not a story about people shooting laser beams from their eyes. X-Men is a story about prejudice and not being racist to blue German people. And if you're one of the people who complains about X-Men getting too political, then I hate to say it, but you're not a real X-Men fan. There are tons of stories that are just about people with superpowers beating each other up. In fact, I'd argue that's what the worst X-Men movies are. So if you want that, just go watch Dark Phoenix. X-Men 97 is going to get a 9 out of 10. Can't wait for season 2. Is there anyone I'm forgetting about? Oh, right. I completely forgot Wolverine was in this show.